passionately about these issues. Um, I have been thinking about this question of a moment that I'd like to share. And it happened relatively early on in my experience here at Northeastern, where one of the things we do in the Social Impact Lab is engage students in experiential philanthropy education, where they do real dollar grant making. And we had a time where after awarding a grant, hey Armani, after awarding a grant to a really fantastic community-based organization in Boston the following year, I invited somebody from that organization to come and talk to our students. And this is a person who had had experience with incarceration and came and, as a guest, taught more to my students and more valuable and conveyed more valuable knowledge and wisdom to my students than I ever could. And it really struck me how valuable this person's wisdom and knowledge were. And I had invited them into the classroom to teach students, engage with students, and had not offered the individual any kind of compensation for their time. And it really struck me that that was just one instance in which many of us in universities take advantage of people's wisdom and time through these community partnerships and don't value the time or their wisdom in this and compensate it the same way we ourselves get compensated. And that was really a wake up moment for me, and it shaped a lot of how I think about this over the last 15 years. And I'm still grateful to that individual, not just for what he shared that day, but for engaging with me in conversation about how I recognized in the moment it was really problematic. My behavior had been really problematic.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story and digging into that vulnerability, Rebecca. Can you just talk a little bit about how your work, how that has shaped your work and any lessons that you learned from that? Yeah.
Yeah, it really got me thinking not just about reorienting my understanding of just the value of people's times, the value of people's wisdom and lived experience, but also how thoughtful we have to be about changing our practice within higher ed. So that started me on a journey of really even questioning what like the power and privilege of this experiential philanthropy work that I do, because I see it definitely as a well-intentioned conduit of funding into the community. And over the years, the Social Impact Lab has facilitated hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of grants to local communities, but the process really matters. And we have to work really hard to make sure that we're not mimicking some of the oppressive behavior that conventional philanthropy also does, where people outside of communities wielding the money as a form of power over others in the name of doing good and with all good intentions. And so I feel like my whole time doing this work um, has been about grappling with those kinds of things and trying to make the grant making here a lesson about power and resource control and humility and learning about and respecting organizations, as opposed to ever giving students this impression like, oh, you're so smart, you're so great, you should get to decide what to do with this money. It's not even that much money. It's the idea that whether it's in my class or in other experiences, how people vote, how people, think about their purchasing power, whether they volunteer on boards, there's, so many ways that we have power our whole lives, and we can use it with good intentions and cause harm. And we shouldn't be teaching people that that's okay in our classrooms. And I think it's very easy for universities to do that by using community partners and partnerships as a teaching laboratory without recognizing how unintentionally harmful it can be.
Yeah. Definitely appreciate that. Thank you, Rebecca, for reflecting that. And yeah, I think it's really good for us to be able to have reflection and understand our processes and understand that sometimes when we're doing projects, we might plan for things, we may miss things. I just want to also say this, in my process of working at the intersection of supporting like a university and working with community, it is a balancing act of how to like be a bridge and how to be supportive. And so just like for all the transparency, like we're in a moment where there's a lot of stuff going on in community, and it may not be the most advantageous to like spend, you know, a certain amount of time on a Zoom, right? To have a conversation. So I really appreciate you, Armani, for like being able to jump into this conversation. And I want to hear about like the work that you're doing. I know that you're just coming off of like a big week of work with Reclaim. And so if you can share a little bit about that, but then also like after that, would love to hear more about, you know, a story and connection to community and like with the universities, like how that any type of story and any type of lessons you learn from that.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, Vatic, and good to see Rebecca, Leah, and other folks in the room that I recognize, like Hassan. Um, yeah, and so I'm executive director at Reclaim Roxbury, and we just had our big inaugural fundraiser this past Thursday, the Celebration of Roxbury Legends event, where we honored Greg Minot, who's a local Black developer slash architect who co-founded the Dream Development Team. There's two Black co-founders, and yeah, they've been Greg. We honored him because he has been the leader on a number of developments of projects that were shaped by community standards that require said projects to have two-thirds affordable housing, as well as sustainable development guidelines. You know, coming to the subject of today, sustainability, as well as a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion around the development, around the different contractors on the development team. And so we honored him. He's, you know, a lead developer of this like revival of Nubian Square in Roxbury, which is the heart of Roxbury. It's a Black community in Boston, right next to Northeastern, if you're not familiar. And I'm about to help me understand, are most people here kind of students, or I'm looking in the chat box. I can't tell because not everyone is checked in, but or most people, I guess either way
I
doesn't
think
matter.
people are from all over.
Oh,
People are
okay,
from
cool.
all over. Yeah,
All
yeah.
over. Cool. Yeah. So I guess I was gonna like pin my story to the crowd, but I'll just do a general one. So I guess a cool to Vatek's kind of prompt for the opening around like my relationship about or moment, you know, important moment I've had during a university community partnership. So I'm, you know, born and raised in Boston, Roxbury, Lower Roxbury, between there and Bromley Heath, which is like borderline of JP Rocks. And but I spent, you know, but I yeah, my Northampton Street, which is right next to Northeastern, a part of the Northeastern campus at this point, is where my family owns property. And so I've basically, you know, grown up in and around Northeastern, and you know, I've watched how that has affected the neighborhood and the way that it's pushed a lot of the local folks out in not direct ways by like Northeastern necessarily buying and clearing people's buildings, but in the way that the expansion of the campus has created a higher value of property in the area, and the availability of like students, more students, and the because there's not necessarily a commitment to house all students on campus that trickles into the local community, causing, you know, pressure on like, the naturally affordable rental housing. So I've experienced that, and that's like one angle. But I guess one story that I do want to share that I think is a bit cooler and more inspirational is yeah, and I'll say that the work that we're doing now at Reclaim Roxbury, I think is inspirational. The way that we're trying to work with Northeastern to hold them accountable. But the story that I'm sharing is not about Reclaim Roxbury. It's about my time in college. I went to college at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and as a student, we organized with local advocates, local people that we met. You know, I was a part of the Black Student Union there, and you know, I got my hair done at a salon in town, and so I knew some of the women that worked there, and as an advocate working on some issues, also got connected with folks in the neighborhood working on like police community relationships. And essentially, together, we were able to hold like a protest. Um, this is during 2020, or no, 2020. I graduated in 2015. So this is 2014, 2013. Not George Floyd. At the time, it was, gosh, at the time it was a different black person that was good. I can't even remember at this point, but that it was during that Black Lives Matter uprising moment, and we were able to essentially work with the local community to make our student protest where we marched off campus and like held up traffic in Connecticut, in on their main street, and we got to platform the extrajudicial killing, kind of like the of a local black man who had mental health issues, and it was powerful because we were able to use our student platform to help do something that maybe the local community didn't have the numbers for or hadn't decided to organize around yet. And we were able to target something that was able to bring light to a local issue. And through that, essentially the a university committed to creating a Martin Luther King scholarship that exists to this day that funds local Black students who are looking to go to college and get into the higher education, kind of as a university commitment to justice in response to their students doing a protest in town. And so I think that is kind of a cool story. But yeah, my life is kind of about is about it's kind of been in the shadow of a university between living in one and then obviously going to universities. But and now working in my community to make sure that our local university, Northeastern, is held accountable. So that's a bit of a story about me.
Can I
Yeah,
make a personal connection with Armani around that story?
please
I
go
went
ahead.
to Wesleyan too.
There you
And
go.
one of my first efforts trying to influence university behavior was in protesting against investment in South Africa and combating apartheid, which they divested from. And so that was one of my first experiences in the same place, seeing that it is possible to shift institutional behavior if you organize. And I love that we have a common experience around that institution.
Yeah, it's clear Wesleyan, produces some good radical folks. And I do feel like, I don't know, if just building on that point, I feel like it's important to bring up the fact that I don't know, in the context that we're having this conversation of sustainability and community relations, and we have this student at Columbia who like recently was like
Yes.
captured by Department of Homeland Security for his advocacy around disinvestment due to apartheid, a different version. And I just want, if folks don't know, I think it's really important for everyone to have their eyes on that. The student had his green card and was essentially, assaulted at night at home with his pregnant wife and taken out of his home, and his lawyer hasn't been able to get in contact with him. It's somewhat breaking news if you don't know. Now you know. But as we're having this conversation around sustainability and holding, speaking truth to power and holding universities accountable, I hope that as the year rolls out, Northeastern also is gonna, and all of us as either students or you know neighbors or university folks think about how we do our best to protect our students and our community in very wild times. I think the student's name is Mahmoud Khalil, if you want to look it up on your own. But yeah, it's a wild time to be doing this work of justice and community and advocacy. And yeah, we should all be very concerned about the arrest of this person who's doing the work that we really are doing right here today. So,
Yeah, thank you for lifting that up, Armani. And I think, of like sharing like from your story, are there things that you put in place in the work that you do when you're engaging with universities to make sure that you're pushing them in the direction they need to be going?
could you ask that one more time?
Yeah, I'm just asking like connected to like your story and like things that you learned in your development. Are there ways that you learn something from that story that you like institute and how you go about building relationships with universities now?
Yes, I think my kind of experience, as being a person, like when I'm in Boston, I'm a community person, right, who's affected by university. And then as I travel to another community, Middletown, Connecticut, I become the student who's, a part of this university that has an impact on the local community. And so, you know, it's something that I think about a lot when uh yeah, about how, each of us, the role that we play, the ways that we can lean on them. And so, back home, when I think about working with students at Northeastern around local issues, I think it's really important that we have a cross kind of community, if you will, connection between like on campus, off campus advocacy. We were able to work with students against institutional discrimination some years ago, and I can't remember the date because COVID threw me off on time. But we helped worked with students to pass a non-binding resolution to have Northeastern commit to commit to more community-led development. And so that was like a big, beautiful moment for me, because we were working very closely with students who are self-organized. And so there was it's like if you organize where you are, then you can actually, and you build power where you are, then you actually can lend that to, on campus or off campus efforts. So I think that's something that I think about too, is like how is the power that we're building either on campus, off campus, how we thinking about how to use that in tandem with other organized entities off campus, on campus, to do the most we can to advance justice.
Yeah, thank you for that, Armani. And I think about that on campus, off campus, that inside outside strategy, like how we are doing the work, inside, how we pushing from outside. And so like from your perspective, Rebecca, like being a person who's like on the inside, but also like working with folks on the outside, from your perspective, what is your understanding, or what understandings do you think that educators and researchers lack the most when doing work with community-rooted organizations?
I'm glad you framed that question with that little preface about the inside and outside piece, because I think there's so much about being on the inside that people need to be aware of, but aren't. And so I'm going to preface this by saying a couple good things. I think universities are valuable and that teaching and research are important. I think a lot of people here have enormously good intentions, and it's what brought them to do teaching and research. And I also want to acknowledge that I have benefited my whole career from working, the last 15 years at a university. And things that can also be true. The academy, like that there's that name, right? The academy, which, accounts for like higher ed collectively, is incredibly isolated from pretty much every other aspect of life. I mean, it's a really different place in terms of the structure of how people are employed and what is done here, and like often like physically isolated on these campuses. And then there's this, I think, elitism that people don't understand they internalize because of the whole way knowledge is created and celebrated in the academy, that prioritizes and prizes that kind of knowledge over and above everybody else's knowledge. And that means that without ever saying it or articulating it, there's this implicit dismissal of the value of the wisdom and knowledge and lived experience of communities that doesn't come necessarily from being told that they're lesser than or thinking that they're lesser than, but being told that what you do is better than and is like the most rigorous and the most valuable. And then I think what also happens is in higher ed, as in, I think many branches of like the social change industry, higher ed, philanthropy, policy making, corporate social responsibility, those spaces are all in their own silos. And they tend to incentivize and reward and even celebrate saviorist behavior. And again, I think it's about people's professional identities. I don't think that this is just about racial or ethnic identity and lived experience in terms of different socioeconomic groups, although that plays into it. I think it's more about how you gain power and fame and recognition in these silos that just makes more and more different distance between you and the communities that you really think you're helping and want to be helping, but you just get more and more detached from them. And so that's really about people's identity, which is separate from the way institutions behave badly as institutions. I think people don't bring their best selves, not I guess basically because they've been socialized in their workplaces and rewarded in their workplaces to do that. And that's hard, it's hard to overcome that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and thinking about like your work with Social Impact Lab, and how you all have like the principles, how have you seen that work being necessary in a moment like now? You're on mute, Rebecca. So.
I think right now, more than ever, it's always been important, but more than ever, to simply name things, to not contribute to the normalization of certain behaviors or the perpetuation of certain behaviors by just being silent about them. And so one of the things, because I do straddle the work in higher ed and being an organizer and practitioner, is naming that these practices that are unintentionally but still truly oppressive in the relationship between universities and community members and community partners, just naming them. And that's what we tried to do in the Social Impact Lab. And I did that in collaboration with other colleagues, Becca Berkey and Jordana McConaughey. But they live in the Social Impact Lab, naming these principles of anti-oppressive community engagement for researchers and educators that just name these human things that we should be doing, that we should be seeing the value in autonomy in communities. We should be honoring people's lived experience. You know, the principles themselves don't sound earth-shattering. They're just basic statements of human decency. I think the challenge is in understanding how much we have been institutionally socialized not to behave that way, and how many of the practices in higher ed around getting your funding, around getting tenure, around proving your expertise actually prevent us from being our human best selves when we're trying to work in collaborations with others. And so there's institutional barriers, but then there's also these personal barriers that we've internalized because of how the institution behaves.
Yeah, thanks for plugging that in. And yeah, just thinking about that work and like how the principles are are like common sense and like really, it's essential for folks to like have that common sense when they're coming into community. I wanted to ask you, Armani, from like your perspective, when you're like, when you're being approached, you know what I'm saying, when Reclaim is being approached by universities, by different organizations, by researchers, what do you kind of weigh? Like, what are some of the drawbacks to partnering with university labs or researchers? And then also, like, what are some of the elements that need to be in place to ensure community partnership leads to significant positive impact?
Thank you, Vadik. So it's a big question. I think like using university like lab and like research capacity is like when it's done best, it's when it's kind of brought to the community. It's like, what do you want? Here's how we are able to provide that. This is how free it is. But that is never really how it happens because that's just not the nature at this point of how I feel like of how things are done. It's because frankly there is a lot of probably demand from the community for different things, and so I can't, it might be even impossible to meet the need of every single research desire. Um, but basically, at Reclaim Roxbury, we get requests constantly, um, probably like on a weekly or biweekly basis from students wanting, from different kind of trades, if you will, like, the social work to the urban planning to um, political science, real estate, journalism, reaching out to us for kind of like either from everything from a quote for a student newspaper to um, a request for an hour, 30-minute, 45-minute interview for a paper to an ask to help with a project. And I think there's like a level of like it's really like nice to kind of be seen as a community organization doing great work that is something that students should want to or should be required to sometimes even maybe by professors to contact to kind of make their work um more legit and have had like that kind of on the ground from the source. I forgot what you call it in like academic writing, but when you have like the source first, primary source, secondary source, yeah, like a primary source right there. And it just takes a lot of capacity to respond to each and every request, even to say no. Sometimes that, we don't even have the capacity as a small, organization with, two full-time staff as of, 8 months ago, one full-time staff as of 2 years ago, but existing for 9 years and doing powerful work. It's just, we're not often able to respond to every request. And it really is the times that the requests from university partners looks most like, here's, an opportunity, like I described originally, here's an opportunity to do whatever you want for free, or we'll pay you. Um, that's when we kind of respond most. And so when we hear about those type of opportunities, those are the best ones. And so I think, yeah, figuring out how to both benefit the university and whatever effort is happening, benefiting the community and whatever we're working on is when it's most ideal. And either, that work funding the community partners and or not costing anything if there's research being provided to community is ideal. So that's, I guess, my long, you know, windy way of answering that Vatsik. But I think, yeah, the last thing I'll say is it's we need to have that kind of partnership, and I think students, teachers, people should reach out to community orgs, but it shouldn't be expected maybe to always get a response. And I think if there were students and folks at universities who were like volunteering more of their time with, say, like Reclaim Roxbury, then it would be less burdensome because that some of that work could be done by the volunteers that volunteer for the organization. But I think it's just one of these things where, people don't have time. Or and so as that's one thing we're working on, we're trying to build our volunteer capacity so that we can do more stuff like help students, be able to have the, perspective, our primary kind of source information for their research and efforts. That's the last thing I'll say. I could go on.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Armani. And I see, Rebecca, there's some stuff bubbling up for you. Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, there really is. Armani, that was such a perfect example for this conversation because the world is better when young people are learning how to do things well. Like journalism is such a great example of that. We need good journalism. And the only way to learn how to be a good journalist is by being out in the world doing it, right? And learning to interview and all of those values and like the ethics of that and the practice of it, like it's a skill and it's an art. And so, yes, like you got to be in the world doing that. And yet, there are hundreds of students who are doing things where real life exposure and practice would be good. And if everybody does that, how are you as an institution supposed to absorb hundreds and hundreds of requests? And the instructor is right that being experiential provides a better learning experience. And yet the problem is this sort of lack of awareness that it's not just you, it's everybody else in your department and everybody else in other departments, and that process matters. And to me, it's about emphasizing the human nature of these relationships and thinking about process and relationship building long before you're sending your students out into the field to ask people to do interviews or whatever, volunteer, whatever it is. And then recognizing that there has to be that mutual value and reciprocity here. And how do you build that? And some of that is interpersonal, but some of it has to be institutional as well.
Yeah, definitely. So appreciate you, Armani and Rebecca, being in this conversation and answering the questions that I've been sharing with you all in space. And also behind in the chat, I'm like chatting them, sending chat messages. This is the time for you all in our audience, for you all to start thinking about questions, to have those questions start bubbling up. And we would love to start throwing some of those questions here in the chat. Also, like, I'm thinking maybe we can have Leah spotlight some folks and have more people kind of step into this conversation so we can be asking questions of each other. And then also, like Rebecca and Armani, if you all have questions for the audience, like Armani already started us off, like, hey, where are you all from? Like we can start asking some questions of folks in the so-called audience, some questions. So I wanted to like prep that for everybody. But before we go to some of those questions, my last thought, and I would love to get answers from Armani, Rebecca, and then anybody else in the space that has like an idea around this. But just thinking about research partnerships, how can research partnerships support direct action, collective decision making, and narrative building for any type of for the work that needs to be happening in this moment? How can research be used for good? for partnerships in the ways of direct action, collective decision making, and narrative building. And maybe there are some other ways too. So just wanted to like put that question out there, and maybe to, I'm not sure, Armani or Rebecca, rock paper scissors, who goes first? I'll pass it to Rebecca, then go to Armani. Yeah. All right. Cool.
Okay. I'm trying to wear both my hats now as like an activist organizer and as somebody on the inside here. And we're talking about right now, I think. There is so much happening right now intentionally to keep us off balance, to keep us confused, to keep us from having the time to be in community with each other, that in the moment, I think knowledge sharing and that expertise that I said before can lead to elitism and isolation, recognizing how important it is to be exchanging information in mutually valuable ways. So for example, just keeping track of all the executive orders and what they mean for nonprofits from a legal perspective. I've been on a number of calls the last week about like, what does this mean for your organization? What does it mean for people who hold your identity? What are the risks? What are the things that you can be doing to push back? People on the front lines and community-based organizations are dealing with more than ever right now. Having good conduits of information with the people whose job it is to keep track of policy and laws and legal implications is just one example to me, I think, where in the moment, we need to bring all of our expertise to the table, recognize that we're all in this together, and be using it to inform the kinds of risky decisions and behaviors that people in communities in the front line are facing and need to make decisions about how to engage and respond with as much good intel as possible. And I think that could potentially be incredibly important.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Rebecca. Go
you,
ahead.
I think you said it perfectly. I'm not even sure what else to add. I mean, I feel like it, yeah, yeah, in trying times like right now, it's just really important to be thinking, about how a university like Northeastern has the capacity to, what they have the capacity to take on, and yeah, and what they're able to do. And I think it's been interesting, I think, to see how different universities have even responded, like to the DEI attacks from the federal government, and different universities are taking different positions, and so it's just yeah, I think it would be interesting I think it's interesting it'll over the next weeks, months, whatever time. I think using resources at the university level is going to be, or resources to universities are going to be threatened in and of themselves. And so it'll be interesting to see how, if, say, funding for research is under threat, how the university decides to do, A, B, or C, as opposed to, X, Y, Z, in light of that. And so yeah, I think if there's a way to also um, have a level of um bravery, I think, around some of what's happening, it's going to be really important that places that have a lot of power, and yeah, power, that kind of use that power to do something and support whatever is happening in the moment. And so again, like I mentioned earlier, if a student is disappeared by Department of Homeland Security, what is Northeastern going to do to actually protect their students, and their if that is to happen, similar to Mahmoud Khalil. What kind of resources, what kind of, is going to be deployed? What kind of planning is already happening to prevent, anything like that? I know I'm on the board of other nonprofit institutions who are working with their property management companies to think about and plan for, what's within their legal rights to protect, tenants from ICE. Um, so yeah, I think that there's lots of uh, capacity that needs to be put towards research on just like how to protect people at this stage, but then also, yeah, like in the fight back against it, thinking about how to be strategic to still exist and be able to be the powerful. So I hope that was a good, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. And so in the chat, we got some questions coming up. So I'm inviting you into the space. Sonali, did you want to introduce yourself and then ask your question? You're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the spotlight is. Oh, I'm just seeing myself. I think I'm because I'm on my phone. But hi, I'm Sonali, and it's so nice to listen to this overall panel and dialogue. Because on the topic of the question around like research and community, and I'll introduce myself. I've done work in climate and sustainable innovation and helping startups of color really connect and get, you know, grow their businesses and also be able to pilot their technologies within communities that they're from and represent and have lived experiences in trying to solve issues. But nonetheless, what I'm not on the panel, obviously, but what came to my mind as someone who has begun strengthening the connection between climate and culture in their work, and specifically doing that in the way of incorporating community. And I just see that in part, I just see the need to ensure that, you know, for whatever opportunity is going on, you know, whether it's a research thing, and I'm coming as a student who recently finished their MBA. But when it comes to those kind of partnership opportunities and understanding the dynamics of, at least from a point perspective of some community organizations and understanding capacity is limited. I worked at a nonprofit. I worked at Greentown Labs previously, but and some other nonprofits. So I have a little bit of understanding around tight budgets. But all this to say, especially in a time like now, I can't further emphasize the need that when it comes to any of these um, opportunities to do work, the focus I really hope should be on, you know, fund like direct funding for opportunities that allow people from the community to, you know, help grow local economies. And I don't know, I think I don't know, I just when it was mentioned that there I think Armani, when you mentioned you know, the capacity, and there's so many people who want to do good work, but it requires some of the organizations to volunteer their efforts. I think a moment like now that we're in just shows, especially I'm speaking from a black person from the a black American community, that a large focus, I think, at least in my opinion, should be um, really kind of getting into the nitty gritty and more directly working and aligning with opportunities that align with direct investment to the people that need it the most, and the leaders that are from the communities that are supposed to be doing the work. Because I think volunteer sometimes can be very extractive, but I think this is a moment in time where we're seeing that it really again has to come from our communities, and that is right now at least what's going to get us through even this time right now. And because of that, no playing games, like finding these opportunities and people who are really trying to make the opportunity to grow and strengthen local economies, resilient economies and communities a reality more. I'll get off my little thing, but that's all I wanted to say on top of
Uh,
that. So yeah.
Appreciate you jumping in here and asking your questions, and then hopefully we can connect after this with other folks in the space. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Appreciate you adding that into the conversation, Sonali. So I am not seeing any other questions yet, but I see Armani, you might have some questions in your head. Rebecca, you have questions. I wanted to, before I like go into that though, I was just like, I'm prepping you all because I want you to be ready with questions after I talk. That's why I was just saying that preemptively. But I didn't introduce myself fully. I have like a way of like just like not doing that. But my name is Vadik, he, him, his pronouns, like as you can see here. I'm co-executive director of One Square World. One Square World, we're an intermediary bridge building organization, and we work with universities, state, like the state or like a city, to connect with community-based organizations to like support uh, the building of collaborative governance structures. I think that's maybe one of the best ways to explain that. But we're kind of the intermediary, we're in between. And I didn't answer my first question. I wanted to just like go on the vibes of the group. But I think about universities, and I was thinking about like my first interaction with universities. And right now I'm sitting in Brown University, where I'm artist in residence and working in their Africana studies. And I'm working on a theatrical piece that's connected to Mary McLeod Bethune. And so Noliwe Rooks, who's the chair of Africana Studies, wrote this beautiful book. And when I'm reading it, I'm just like finding myself in the pages. When I was a youth in Daytona Beach, I went to the Black Male College program at Bethune-Cookman College. And I think about that as a way of like doing direct action with community. There was like a way of me being able to like see some of the resources, me being able to get around, people who are doing research and connecting with them with Black history, that has really like helped me in the work that I do. But then yeah, there's always this pushing, this push and pull when it comes to different things with universities and with power. So I really appreciate the conversation that we're having, and I just kind of wanted to like add that into the space. And Eric Jones, I'll invite you into the space. With that being said, I'm here at Africana Studies. Wait, I'm gonna spotlight you when I see your camera is up, and we'll add you up here to the space. Eric, oh, here we go. So Eric, did you have a question you wanted to add to yeah.
Yeah, I have like a brief comment, as well as a couple questions. Vadik, Rebecca, Armani, thank you for this wonderful conversation. The point that was made about the academy being isolated, from life really resonated with me. Oh yeah, and again, I'm Eric Jones. I'm a PhD candidate in the Africana Studies Department at Brown University, and my research looks at the intersection between environmental racism and health inequity. So with my work, I'm engaged with the community in terms of, conducting interviews. And I always try to preface my interactions with community members by saying that this isn't just a professional project, it's a personal project. Given the area that I'm studying, I have family members, in that particular area in the Pittsburgh region. But at the same time, as I'm conducting, these interviews and extracting this local form of knowledge, I have feelings of guilt, right? Because I'm trying to figure out, like, yes, I'm getting this key information, to write this dissertation, but I have to produce some type of work that's actually going to benefit the community, because the individuals that I'm focused on, you have journalists come in, you have these universities come in, and they're doing these partnerships. And then, once they're done with their work, they just up and leave, So I'm trying to figure out, like, I guess this kind of leads to my first question. How do we rethink the role of faculty and students in partnerships with communities, not only just like a short-term thing in terms of the project, but long-term? And how do we rethink knowledge production and better legitimize the lived experience as a form of knowledge? Understanding like what's considered valuable knowledge and not as valuable knowledge within the academy. These are things that I wrestle with in terms of, you know, what is my long-term engagement with the community, and how do I, as a person situated within the humanities, like present, certain forms of knowledge that some people may not see as knowledge at all, So yeah, that's my comment and question.
Thank you for that, Eric. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here, Eric. Um, and for presenting the question. Um, and I guess I'd be one thing that came to mind immediately is like, what kind of work are you kind of contacting local folks for? Because my immediate thought when I think about what makes me more willing to kind of participate, and this is me as like the director of an advocacy organization. I'm not necessarily the type of person that everybody's trying to reach out to from the university, right? People might actually want a community like church agency or like a religious organization or an organization that focuses on issues that are not what we focus on, which is like fair housing, public land, and advocacy. So just kind of prefacing my response on that. It's like, I get mostly people contacting to like learn about our advocacy, which is often like fast moving and requires a lot of capacity. Not to say that other things don't, but I don't know. It just there's we don't have a lot of time on our hands. I think as an agency organization, um, that's not directly around like the organizing and education of our constituents and the advocacy with the powers that be. And so like extra stuff, which would be kind of like sitting for an hour or 2 hours and talking to someone about why we do what we do, isn't something that is going to feel like a good prioritization of resources, of scarce resources. But we try to make time for it because at times that research, when it feels really useful towards our effort, or there might be a lull. So yeah, I always think like I'm not a researcher, I'm not academic, but like I would be asking those questions myself, like what is my work doing, what's it for? And maybe is there someone who's less busy who can give me the same quality than what a person that's more busy, if I'm trying to like look for someone doing advocacy. But yeah, I don't know exactly. Like for example, my father at one point was interviewed about like his life in the Lower Roxbury as a Black person. That Northeastern did like a community research thing, and he sat, and it was like a 2-3 hour thing. And no disrespect to my pops, but he has a lot of free time, he enjoys that kind of stuff. He's an artist, and he like just has like, yeah, he has time to do that. Like someone like me, I don't think I'd have time to sit down for 4 hours and to do that. And also to feel like he enjoyed that because it's gonna like it's something that if it was good for him to talk about his life and as an artist and coming up and as an advocate too. He's an advocate too, but isn't currently like leading an agency, as an executive director. So yeah, I would say, but I think his experience in that research project was amazing. And although a person like me might have not had the time to be a part of it, that doesn't mean other people can't. So there's like lots of people in our communities, cities. So um, yeah, maybe not always looking for the person that you would imagine to look for that for that conversation could help to not feel as extractive. But then if you are needing to talk to the director of an agency that's in the midst of fighting gentrification in one of the most expensive cities in the country with the shrinking Black population, if that's something you really like need, then I think there's a reality where you're not supposed to necessarily pay to play. Like you can't, it's unethical to pay someone for their time, I think, right? In the research world, last I checked. Maybe that's changed under executive order recently, but kidding. But I say it to say like, if you have time to volunteer, I don't think that that's payment. And I think that's something that is worth doing is, volunteering with, if it's something as simple as coming in and cleaning, like seeing if there's a way to get in to help not just extract, and if you can't pay. That's the last thing I'll say.
Cool. That's time banking. That's a great idea, Armani. Thank you for adding that in. Rebecca, you wanna? Yeah.
Yeah, Eric, I want to acknowledge the vulnerability of talking about the guilt of doing this work. And I'm familiar with that feeling. And one of the things I've learned is that guilt's not a productive place from which to try to do the work, but it can be generative if you listen to it and try to like understand like what is that guilt trying to tell us and what can we learn from it and can we turn it into awareness and accountability and transparency, right? Which isn't to say that there aren't problematic roots to maybe what we're doing, but it also, I think, means we shouldn't overcorrect and just say, okay, no more research with communities because there's a risk of harm, right? Like, so overcorrection is like, what is the expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater? That's a horrible expression, but you know what I mean? Like hold on to what's good. And I think that comes from the relationship building, the transparency. Like, people can understand that, like, in order to work in this field, you need to write a dissertation, you need to publish, you need to have something with your name on it. But it doesn't mean that there can't be other ways that you write about it that put other people's names on it, right? Like maybe your second or third articles, you're sharing authorship with others. Maybe you're actually giving lead authorship to somebody else, or you're publishing in a local newspaper or something together. And so I think that there are so many ways that we should be looking for multiple agendas to be advanced simultaneously, as long as we're sure that there's at least some mutual value and we're just being honest about that, right? Like, Vadik, you've got this great artist in residency thing. It's a huge opportunity and responsibility, but you need to get recognition for the time and the work that you're doing. That doesn't make it bad, right? So like, Vadik, I'm using you as an example of your creation will matter. If there are things that you can do there that bring community and give opportunity, you will. But it doesn't mean that any individual's work coming out of the academy is not valuable just because we have to find new and additional ways to do it that bring more value to more people. And I think that's about relationship building, accountability, transparency, and sharing opportunities and resources whenever we have the opportunity to do so.
Great. Thank you for that, Rebecca, that response. Eric, thank you so much for coming through, and great reflection and question. I think we're gonna leave this part of the conversation there, and we're gonna just say, let's go ahead and Armani and Rebecca, just like final words, like how do we want to leave this? Any type of thing, like last words, what's coming up for you, Rebecca, then Armani?
I think this is about just always remembering our shared humanity and not assuming that because of somebody's affiliation with an institution that they're inherently problematic, and leave room for us all to be learning and growing together through relationship building, because we don't know how to do this work well, and we can't get better at it if we don't try and create spaces like this for dialogue and grace and wisdom sharing.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Armani.
Yeah, just plus to what Rebecca said, just keep trying to do good things where you can, and don't be offended if you don't hear back from a local organization in the time period you need it, and don't let that stop you from reaching out to them. And yeah, if organizations should look at local organization or local universities as resources and try to use them as much as possible while holding them accountable. So it's both and yin and yang kind of vibe.
There it is. All right, y'all. Thank you all for your time. There's the email for Armani. Rebecca, if you want to put your info in the chat, that'd be great. And Leah, any final words for Sustainability Week? What are people going to next? Is there something else today?
There's actually a great event. It's hosted out of our Oakland office campus, so it's going to be late, but if you're a night owl, there is an event tonight on cultural sustainability and BIPOC community activism. So check that out if you're interested.
What time is it at?
That would be 9 p.m. Eastern time. I'll put the link in the chat.
If you're a night owl or an actual owl, if you want to fly over to Oakland, I'm not sure Owl can make it, but I believe in you, Owl. All right, y'all. Thank you for your time, and that's it.
Thank you, Vadik. Thanks, Rebecca, Armani. Take care. Bye.
Take care, everyone.